welcome to Agape Latte. This is our second one of the semester. We have one more after this in a month. Maria McCoy will be speaking. Tonight we are very lucky to have Sister Mary Sweeney. A few things before we begin. As always, we have food available throughout the presentation. Feel free to help yourself. You won't be disturbing the filming, the camera's here. I mentioned before about our raffle. I will mention again that we are doing a raffle at the end of the evening, and at the beginning of the food table is a glass jar and some slips of paper if you would like to be in the running to win a gift card to the bookstore. Put your name down and email and put in the slip of paper. At the end of tonight's presentation, we'll pick a winner. Welcome and happy Lent. We'll be talking a little bit about Lent tonight. As always with Agape Latte, please think along with our presentation tonight. Have some questions. We will be having a Q&A time at the end, and we hope to make this part of an ongoing conversation for all of us here. If you have, please make sure your cell phone ringer is off. Thank you. One announcement that I want to make is that Campus Ministry is again doing its traditional Lenten Busy Student Retreat. And you can sign up anytime online at Campus Ministry's website. The sign-up will close out next Tuesday, a week from tonight. So there's a week to sign up for it. And it happens on campus over the course of 10 days. You meet with a spiritual companion 3 times, and there are a couple prayer gatherings. It's pretty simple, no heavy lifting, and it's been a valuable way for everybody who's done it to experience Lent in a particular way. So I encourage you to think about doing the Lenten Busy Student Retreat. Sign up online at Campus Ministry's website. I want to thank the students in the C21 Advisory Committee for all their work on an ongoing basis for Agape Latte and C21, and also Paul Wendell and Karen Kiefer for doing this as well, and in particular for Sister Mary Sweeney for being here. Thank you. Sister Mary is with us, and I'm going to introduce her. She is, if you are sitting farther away, we'd like to have people come in and make it a little more cozy, so I'm going to invite you to come in and fill in some of these chairs anywhere closer if you like. Because Sister Mary has a handout. I invite you to come in and get cozy. I've been lucky enough to work with Sister Mary for the last 8 years. She's been at Boston College for the last 8 years. She is Sister of Charity. She used to work at a school called Boston University, I think. I've heard of a place like that, but she used to work there apparently in campus ministry as well. She's from Dorchester. She's a true Bostonian, which there aren't enough of here at BC. And she works with graduate students in her capacity at campus ministry. She works with the RCIA program, the Rights for Christian Initiation of Adults, and facilitates the Growing Through Grief program, which, if you're not familiar with, check it out online. It's very important. Also, Sister Mary is terrific. If you don't know her, get to know her, and please join me in giving her a warm welcome.
Well, it's very nice to be with you here this evening. I've heard some wonderful things about the speakers, but also wonderful things about the coffee and the desserts, and they certainly look inviting. When Rick asked me to provide a title for this talk, I came up with the idea of calling it Roots and Roots, which I thought was very clever. You have a homonym, that alliteration that goes with it. But as I sat with it, I was really pleased because when I thought about this week where we're in Lent and we're celebrating St. Patrick's Day, it really struck both of those pieces. As my roots are very much coming from the Irish Catholic tradition, and so it was a great way to combine those feasts in this season. My 4 grandparents came from Ireland, and so that's how I can talk very with great familiarity about that part of my identity. And what I wanted to do this evening was to talk a little bit about my own story as a way of just showing to you some of the decisions that I've made, because I know many of you are always, trying to think about where your own R-O-U-T-E-S are going to take you, what routes you're going to choose. And I think sometimes when we hear other people's stories, it helps us to look at our own stories in a new way. So that's kind of why I chose that title, and like to talk about my own R-O-O-T-S before talking about the other routes I've taken. As I said, my grandparents all came from Ireland. My father's parents were married when they came out. My mother's parents met in this country. And I think as was typical of them, as most immigrants, they found another way to kind of recreate home while they were here, when they came here. And for the Irish, it was in the parishes. So you would go to church on Sunday, and that was a great way to find out what anybody else had heard about home. You know, what did you hear from your family? Now, they didn't make phone calls. They didn't Skype one another back in the first part of the 20th century. So this was a big deal to come to another country and to find a way to keep in touch with home, but to also build a new community here. And so the parish became really the focal point for many of those people. As I said, my father's parents came, and they were married when they came, and they came from Kerry, which is in the southwest corner of Ireland, and it's a county that's known for its storytellers. And I don't think of myself as a great storyteller, but I think of myself as somebody who really loves words. I love the rhythm and the sound. I love the rhyming. And so that's part, I think, of how I came to make some of my choices. I grew up with poetry at home. I don't know if any of you did, but it was a big part of my mother's family. She and her brothers and sisters could get together and recite poetry very easily. And that kind of came into my brother and my sister and me, that we would listen to them, and just by listening to them, you know, that oral tradition, begin to learn some of the poetry. We also would be told, why don't you memorize this? And you would have an opportunity to stand up and recite a poem. Again, I don't know what your home entertainment looked like. Home entertainment has changed considerably over the years. But that was part of what we would do. And so again, that sense of hearing the rhythms and the rhymes was a wonderful thing for me. It was reinforced when I went to school, because the school that I attended, St. Peter's in Dorchester, we learned poetry in classes. As a matter of fact, every year we had a class poet, a class musician, a composer, and a class artist. And it was a wonderful way to be exposed to the arts. But again, my friends and I would be learning poetry frequently. The parish, as I said, was a focal point for many of us. And it wasn't just because it was a place for faith development. It really was the place where we gathered for socials. We had dances, all kinds of things with the Catholic Youth Organization, CYO, programs for children, all kinds of athletic programs. And so while my home life was developing me in one way, it was reinforced by what was going on with my relationship to the church community there in St. Peter's. Very active parish. And some of you who have been around Boston a long time now might have heard us say that we identify ourselves by what parish we came from in Dorchester. They said it's something that you might find in Louisiana, but it's a different connotation. But that was, you know, meet somebody, where are you, what's your name, where are you from, what parish? So it was very much a part of our identity. So we have all of these activities going on through the parish, and it was a wonderful way of meeting people, but also growing in our faith tradition. We had the rhythms of the liturgical year. The Sisters of Charity, of whom I'm a member now, were our teachers, and it was a way of coming to know the motto, God is love, in a very particular way. I was reflecting on the teachers I had when I was preparing for my first communion. I always remember this a lovely sister, and her way of wanting us to learn to love Jesus was very beautiful, and it was so simple for a child. But I do think it was very much rooted in the congregational motto from the first letter of John, God is love. A wonderful image to grow up with. And we had all the various traditions of Catholicism where you would gather for the different seasons, different feasts. Lent was the Stations of the Cross, ways of coming together for Eucharistic adoration, 40 hours devotion, all these things that were part of our story. Excuse me. My brother and my sister, as I said, also memorized poetry. And one of my fond memories of growing up was one night my mother and father went out shopping. And they sat me on the dining room table. I was quite small. And they recited a poem, and it was a very sad poem. And I started to cry, and my mother and father came in. And weren't pleased, of course, to see me sitting on the table, for one thing, I'm sure. Couldn't figure out why I was crying. But again, it was this whole sense of listening to poetry that my brother and sister had memorized, and how we shared that with one another. Excuse me. By the time I went to high school, I was pretty convinced that I really was interested in being an English teacher, high school English teacher. That might not come as a surprise to you, but that was really what I decided I wanted to do. And when I was in high school, freshman high school, I had the opportunity to read a play called Our Town. I'd like to share it with you. How many of you have heard of the play or have read Our Town? Anybody here acted in it? It's an excerpt there in your papers. The last section is a story of how a young woman dies in childbirth. The cemetery is just outside the town, up on a hill. And the people there are allowed to relive one day of their lives. And she chooses to relive a birthday. And the people say, don't do it, don't do it. And she says, no, I want to relive a birthday. Now, the experience of living it is one thing, but you watch yourself relive that day. And as she goes through this, she's standing outside it, as it were, saying, I'm here. Oh, how young Mama looks. I didn't know Mama was ever that young. Mama, just look at me 1 minute as though you really saw me. But just for a moment now, we're all together. Mama, just for a moment, we're happy. Let's look at one another. I can't go on. I can't go on. It goes so fast. We don't have time to look at one another. I didn't realize. So all that was going on, and we never noticed. Take me back up the hill to my grave. But first, wait. One more look. Goodbye. Goodbye, world. Goodbye, Grover's Corners, the town. Mama and Papa. Goodbye to clocks ticking, and Mama's sunflowers, and food and coffee, and new iron dresses and hot baths, and sleeping and waking. Oh, Earth, you're too wonderful for anybody to realize you. She looks toward the stage manager and asks abruptly through tears, do any human beings ever realize life while they live it, every minute? And his response is, no. The saints and poets, maybe. They do some. And I grasped that part of the play, Our Town, and it had a deep resonance within me because it seemed to me it was saying, let's take a look at life and really appreciate it, savor it. Don't let it go through your fingers too quickly. And when he says saints and poets maybe, I think that was really one of the pieces that caught me. And it told me that listening, living, if we really appreciate the experience, can have a profound effect on who we become. And I understood then there was something for me in literature that would help me grow spiritually. And I think that's been part of my story over the years. I go back again and again to literature. And I think we all know some of the experience that Emily was talking about. Life goes so quickly. And sometimes we have to just really take the time to be still, to stand and look out the window, to look at the bark of a tree, to really savor, what's wafting through the air. All these things that go by so quickly. And I think that's really the beginning of contemplation, to be able to be still and to look with great respect, maybe even awe, at some of the things we go by so quickly, to really savor those things. So for some of you, that's familiar. I don't know if it had the same effect on you when you read it before, but it certainly was very, very powerful for me. So during high school, literature continued to nourish me. But the other thing that was happening for me during high school was the Vatican Council. Now, when John McDarr spoke the last time, he talked about the upheaval in society because what was going on a few years after Vatican II was all the upheaval in the U.S. because of the Vietnam War. This was matched within the church because of all the changes that had taken place. But for me, those changes created a great deal of enthusiasm and excitement because the church was basically saying, the church is the people of God, and you have a place here, you have a role, you have a responsibility to one another. And that was a wonderfully exciting thing. And some of us seized upon that. And I remember going to the pastor and talking about things that we could do. And I don't know how enthusiastic the pastor was about all these changes we were promoting, but that was what Vatican II did. It generated that kind of excitement. A deepening sense then of a role within the church and this growing love of literature. Well, by the end of high school, it was time to decide what I was going to do. And it wasn't an easy decision. I had been thinking about, actually, I had my whole life planned. Up till I was 26, which when you're 18 seems like a pretty long time. And one of the things I was going to do was, as I had said, go teach English, high school English. I was going to do my master's and teach English. But in the meantime, there was this growing sense that I really wanted to be much more immersed in the church. But I also was thinking more about becoming a sister of charity. Now, remember, those are the sisters I had had in grammar school. And I think they had impressed me as wonderful women who were very happy women. And they wanted us to love God. And they helped us to learn to do things to help one another and help the poor. So I don't know how many of you have had the experience of planning 2 lives simultaneously. Have you all done that? I'm going to BC and I'm going to do this, You can't do that forever. You've got to make a choice. And so my decision was to become a sister of charity, to enter the congregation. It meant leaving behind my family. And religious life was very different in those years. You wrote home once a week. You didn't talk on the phone. It meant leaving behind the plans that I had, the things that I wanted to do when I was going to be in college. I was going to be having a great social life, of course, and I was going to be reading all wonderful things and listening to records. And those things you might not be too familiar with, but that was the life I was looking forward to. But there was this other tug. And I remember praying very fervently. The first line of the prayer for peace from St. Francis, make me an instrument. Make me an instrument. And so after high school, I entered religious life. Now, again, there were so many things going on in religious life at that point, lots of changes. And it was wonderful to be with such great young women who were my classmates, if you will. But as we look around and we see people make new decisions. So not everybody in the group stayed. And one of the best things somebody said to me one time, and when a friend left, was, you have to know what your own vocation is. You can't make a decision based on somebody else. A vocation is a very personal thing, whatever that vocation is. And so we all have to kind of walk that path and see, is this where God is calling me? Well, this is a single life, religious life, married. Is this what I am being called to? It was time to make vows. Commitment, permanent commitment would come later, but we made an initial commitment. And one of again, a wise woman, director of novices, said to us one time, when you make this kind of commitment, it's like writing a blank check. You don't know what's going to be filled in on it. You don't know. And so you make the decision, in grace, in hope, faith, and love. And that's all you can do. You make a decision as it is. So there are lots of points along our routes where we have to, take a risk, but it's something we've considered and we've prayed about. When students come into me sometimes and they talk about that sense of just knowing what not knowing what they're going to do. There's a cartoon I like to show them. I don't know if I have it here, but it's a cartoon of a little bird holding onto a trapeze. Here it is. I don't know if you can see it. Letting go of one holding onto the trapeze, the other letting go, and being in between. And do you have that feeling sometimes? It's kind of like when the seniors think about graduating but not knowing where they're going to be next. And sometimes those are the risks we take, that we say, I will believe that somebody is going to latch on to me, and I will be someplace, and I will be able to be there and to use my gifts and my talents. So when we think about risks, it's important to put them into a larger framework. Where are we going to go? What do we believe we're being called to, even as we're letting go of something, and maybe something familiar? After I did make my profession, I was able to continue my studies, and I did end up teaching high school. Started with junior high. First-year teacher in junior high, not necessarily a pretty sight, but then I ended up teaching high school for a number of years, and it was a wonderful experience because it was, again, that way of interacting with high school girls, sharing literature with them. I taught religion also. And then there was an opportunity to become an elementary school principal, and that was one of the risks that I took. And in thinking about telling you this story, I was reminded of the 3 questions from Father Michael Himes. What brings you joy? Are you any good at it? And remember, the first question is the one only you can answer. And what I realized in doing that job was that there are things we can do. And people might tell us that we're good at them. But if they don't bring you joy, maybe you should look at something else. So that's the important thing, to know those questions, the answers to those questions. What does bring you joy? If you're good at it, that's great. And the ideal, of course, is to find something that you can do that you love doing. And so that was my experience. But while I was in college, there was a sister there who was a campus minister. And she had said, you should think about campus ministry. You'd be good at it. And again, somebody else saying, think about this. Well, I always wanted to continue my theological education. And so I left the position as principal and went on to Weston to study theology. And again, there people said the same thing. You should think about campus ministry. So it's wonderful to get feedback from people, just who maybe don't know you very, very well, but can watch you operate in different circumstances. And so I was able to become a campus minister. As Rick said, I started at BU, and I was there for 9 years. I left there, went up to Merrimack for a year, an interim position. Then I was up at the University of Maine for 7 years, and I came to BC, and this is my 8th year at BC. And somebody joked I'm working my way around Hockey East. It does seem that way. But it's been a wonderful experience. I think my experience of being in campus ministry is that I have a great privilege of working with young adults. And so often the chance to listen to your faith stories has been an inspiration for me to find out how your journey has been, what routes you're taking, to help young adults work through some of the difficulties of grief, to walk with you during retreat experiences. People in the RCIA, that's a wonderfully enriching experience to be with people in the RCIA program. And so I'm always, kind of standing back and looking at my own journey, the routes I have taken, the routes I hope I've followed God's invitation. And I'm reminded of an old saying, God writes straight with crooked lines. Have you all heard that before? Sometimes I've come across people who haven't heard that. You can look at your own failings, your own difficulties, your own limitations, and still see that somehow God can work through you. And it's a real blessing to be able to have that opportunity. I wanted to talk a little bit about Lent also. That's, wonderful season we're in now. But I want to stop there first and ask if you have any questions. Okay. Take my, all right.
I'll just talk loud.
Okay.
I was just curious, you mentioned those two questions that Father Himes would ask. What was the third one?
Does the world need you to do it? Yeah.
In the picture of the bird on the trapeze there, for you, where you were going, that other trapeze, was that the church for you?
It's different times. It's been different things, but sometimes it's just the ministry that I would be going to. We had the experience oftentimes of knowing it was time to leave a particular place, but not knowing where I was going at all. So now I had to let go and just have my hand outstretched. I know a lot of you are trying to make some decisions, and so I just want to call your attention to one of the things that's here on this page. On the back page where the symbol is, there's a poem. It was made a hymn, Lead Kindly Light by Cardinal Newman. It's it comes from the 19th century, early part of the 20th century. Lead kindly light, mid the encircling gloom, lead thou me on. The night is dark and I am far from home. Lead thou me on. Keep thou my feet. I do not ask to see the distant scene. One step enough for me. Sometimes we don't always have the big picture, but we need the light just to go to the next step. And sometimes I think we can be paralyzed if we don't get the big picture. Just to take the next step. Okay. And I included some other poems there that I have found helpful over the years. Some kind of fun, A Dust of Snow by Frost. And then a love poem. I think we should all know a love poem, don't you? You never know when you're going to need it. You should have a love poem memorized. I wanted to say a few words about Lent. I think when we start the Lenten season, we begin to hear a lot of things about what are you giving up? What are you giving up? And that's one way to think about it. But the call to Lent, if you remember the readings from Ash Wednesday talk about prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. But one of the other things that happens on Ash Wednesday when we receive our ashes, well, there are two things that the person who's putting the ashes on your forehead might say. One is, remember you are dust, and unto dust you will return. But the other one is, turn from your sins and believe in the gospel. And that idea of turning is really important. It's a kind of conversion experience in our own hearts, so we open to a change. Turn. And sometimes that can be pretty challenging because we can get very accustomed to certain ways of doing things, certain attitudes we've cultivated, certain habits. And so Lent might be a time for us to think about the things we want to turn toward as we're turning from something to turn towards something else, those changes. You'll see some things posted around where we have a list of, fast from, but feast on. And that whole idea of turning from, being critical. Maybe it's a problem with being honest. And we turn toward the virtues. Turn toward being gracious. Turn toward being grateful. So these ways of turning. I think as young people, though, one of the things that can happen is if we get stuck in some feeling that we see sometimes or some sinfulness, we can really let that overpower us. I had a very wise retreat director one time. We were a group of us young sisters. And he said to us, and this was out at Dover. Some of you have been at Dover. He was a Dominican priest up there. And he said, with young people, discouragement is the devil's best weapon because of the idealism that young people have. And if they can't be perfect, they just want to throw their hands up and say, forget it. And I think we have to be really careful about that, to always say, I go beyond this because God calls me to something new. God calls me to use my gifts in a new way, a way that's really revitalizes us. There's nothing better, I think, than being able to know what your gifts are and use them. And so one of the other poems you have there on that paper, and I'd like you to look at it. Some of you might be familiar with it. Love bade me welcome. It's an old poem, obviously, from the 17th century, but I think it's a beautiful poem. And when I talk about using my gifts, this is the way I like to do it, combining spiritual development with literature. So this is one of them. Love bade me welcome, yet my soul drew back, guilty of dust and sin. But quick-eyed love, observing me grow slack from my first entrance in, drew nearer to me, sweetly questioning if I lacked anything. A guest, I answered, worthy to be here. Love said, you shall be he. I, the unkind, ungrateful? Ah, my dear, I cannot look on thee. Love took my hand and smiling did reply, who made the eyes but I? Truth, Lord, but I have marred them. Let my shame go where it doth deserve. And know you not, says love, who bore the blame? Oh, my dear, then I will serve. You must sit down, says love, and taste my meat. So I did sit and eat. Isn't that a wonderful image? Of being called into a banquet and saying, oh, I don't belong here. No, I'm not worthy to come in here. And love, God says, yes, you come in. The debt's been paid. And I think that's just a great image for us to hold on to sometimes when we can be discouraged about our own shortcomings. That's the invitation. Come in, sit down, come to the table. So these are just some of the things that I wanted to share with you tonight. If you have some time, do look at the other poems. And then take a look at some of the other references maybe. Some of the resources I mentioned, the Psalms that I have found beautiful. And then ask yourself, are there some poems that have been part of your story? How many would say yes right away? There's some poem that stands out for your journey. Okay, that's great. And I would ask you also to think about that whole title that I put together. What in your roots, R-O-O-T-S, has an impact on your roots, R-O-U-T-E-S. I talked to somebody earlier who said, I'm at BC, we're a BC family. There's an example of it in the roots and in the route that she traveled. What are the things that are in your own story, in your families, that you might begin to see as having a real impact on the journey that you're taking now? And can you look at them lovingly and embrace them and celebrate them? I hope so. So thank you very much. This has been great fun. It's always kind of nice, I guess, to tell your own story and hope that it will be helpful to others. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I was just going back to you were saying like being pulled two ways. I think that's probably true for a lot of us. I know definitely for me. Was there like, when you were talking about you kind of have to just make a decision. Was there kind of a point? I mean, I like your point about how you just wait and be latched on and which way you want to go. Was there, do you remember that there was like a more of a defining point where you kind of like decided that the religious life was the stronger pull, I guess?
There must have been, but I can't recall it right now in any one particular moment. I remember praying very much about that. Make me a channel. Use me, make me. The prayer was, make me an instrument. The song is, make me a channel. So that was really important for me to think that I would find great joy and peace in following that path. And I think that's part of it, just say, where am I going to find my joy, my peace? And it's a risk. Yeah.
When you were praying over, and for anybody praying over this issue, where does the guidance manifest itself? You're not going to wake up all of a sudden and know, or you could. But
Yeah.
I don't know how to,
Well, maybe it's like the description of how spring comes in New England. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's a gradual thing. And I think that, we talk with people, we get feedback from people, and that's always helpful. But at some point we have to, and I think that's what you experienced even coming to college, that moment where you say, I'm left alone and this is a really big decision and I get to make it. Yikes, that's frightening. But you make it, and you make it with a sense of hope of saying, this is what looks right to me at this moment. The other piece I would add to is, remember, I talked about being a junior high teacher, high school teacher, elementary school principal, and then doing ministry in these different places. And I think when we look at the way people get into their ministries, their jobs, their professional lives today, there's a lot of movement, and for better or worse, there's a sense of saying, if this doesn't work, in some things certainly, if this doesn't work, I can, try, but for now this looks like the right thing. And sometimes we can't always do exactly what we want to do, and we have to do something in the meantime. Think of maybe nobody here, but some people are rejected from the schools they applied to. And you move on. You do what you think you're supposed to do at the time. You move on to the next thing, you find a new life, and you say, gosh, that was the best thing that happened to me. I found wonderful friends, I got a great education.
Thanks for
Would you join me in giving will this work? Okay. I didn't mention before, Sister Mary actually wrote a book on Lent. It's called Seven Last Words for 7 weeks of Lent. I encourage you to check it out. 4 years ago you wrote it?
I think so.
4 years ago. It's not going to take you too long, and it will provoke a great deal of thought and make Lent be a little deeper for you. I encourage you to check it out.
It's a book to read slowly.